So good morning, everybody. Thank you for attending this webinar on risk preparedness. So we will go through two methodologies. One methodology to identify regional electricity crisis scenarios, and the second methodology for short-term and seasonal adequacy assessments. To present this methodology, Bruce Whittington will present the first methodology. Bruce is project manager for risk preparedness at ENTSO-E. And myself, I am manager of adequacy at ENTSO-E. I will present the second methodology on seasonal and short-term adequacy assessment. As we have many attendees today, and that's a very positive signal. We cannot we cannot give you the microphone for audio question, but we invite you to have written questions using the chat, especially for that in the tool, the GoToWebinar tool. So please don't wait. If you have questions, you can write them during the webinar. And we'll have at the end, after the presentation sessions, we propose a break of 5 minutes in which we would ourselves go through the questions, and then we will reply to the questions. And in case we don't have sufficient time to reply to all questions, we will take them away and reply to you by email. So I propose to give the floor to Bruce Whittington. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Alban. If we could move on to the second slide. So just to a bit of background then, so to how we got to this point. So electricity risk preparedness regulation, which came into force on the 4th of July this year, requires ENTSO-E to propose a methodology for identifying crisis scenarios in a regional context, and also requires ENTSO-E to propose a methodology on short-term adequacy assessment and seasonal adequacy assessment. So so that's what we're proposing in the webinar today. We'll go through those methodologies of and the status of their preparation and what we're consulting on currently. So the methodology, as on that slide, is required to cover the aspects for the identification of crisis scenarios. So it must include the following risks: rare and extreme natural hazards, accidental hazards beyond N-1, and consequential hazards, including malicious attacks and fuel shortages. And the seasonal and short-term adequacy should cover the uncertainties of inputs such as probability of transmission or generation, unplanned outage, probability of crisis situation, and probability of simultaneous crisis situation. So if we could go on to the next slide. So the project status is that we've been working on, and so we've been working on these methodologies for over a year now, and we've already had discussions in preparation before the consultation with the Commission and ASA on early opinion on the methodologies. We've also obviously reviewed them internally within ENTSO-E. So the status is that we've had some comments and shadow opinion from both ASA and EC, and we got to a point of submitting the methodologies for public consultation shortly after the entry into force of the regulation on the 4th of July. So the public consultation started on the 8th of July and is currently in process and will run till the 8th of October. So the position where we are in now is that we're in the middle of the consultation, so we're collating consultation comments as we go. And then following the closure of the consultation on the 8th of October, we're then required as part of the regulation to present the comments back to the electricity coordination group on the 19th of November this year. So it's quite a short time to turn around from the closure of the consultation period. But we've got to present the methodologies to ESA by the 5th of January. So we're working to quite a tight timeline. So any amendments required to the methodology we carried out following that consultation, and then obviously an internal review and final submission by January the 5th. So the approach is this webinar today is part of our consultation approach. We earlier had a workshop with the electricity coordination group on the 10th of July, and we've got this webinar today. So that is really to the opportunity to restart the consultation after the summer recess and make sure that everybody's in tune with giving their comments back by the 8th of October. In the meantime, we're maintaining close liaison with the Commission, DG Energy, and ESA. We have monthly meetings to make sure that the consultation and any comments are managed along the way. So that's where we are, and that's where today fits in the process. So I can now go on to the talk about Article 5, which is the identification of regional crisis scenarios, the methodology for that. So I'll talk through this methodology, and then Alban will talk about the short-term and seasonal adequacy methodology. So next slide, please. Okay, so this slide demonstrates an overview of the methodology. So it's a step-by-step process, and I think if you click through the slide, it will number each of the top steps. So Article 7, and I'll describe those step-by-steps during the course of this presentation. So first step is currently Article 7 of the methodology, which is to identify the national electricity crisis scenarios. So these are candidates for a regional crisis. So they're not just national electricity crisis scenarios. They need to be candidates with a cross-border effect. So I'll describe that in a minute. So that's the first step. So it's a bottom-up process. Then the step 2 is the collation of the national scenarios into a regional picture. And then the next step is, once we've formed a regional crisis picture, then we pass those back to the TSOs to carry out a impact and likelihood assessment on them. And then finally, we come to Article 10, which is the ranking of those crisis scenarios in terms of their severity or impact, and then we will submit those relevant scenarios, the most relevant scenarios, to the ECG. So if you'd like to go on to the next slide, then excuse me. So the first step is the identification of national electricity crisis scenario candidates. So just it's important to establish that this isn't part of Article 7 of the regulation. This is still Article 5 of the regulation. We're not looking at just national electricity crisis scenarios. We're looking at those scenarios which will have a cross-border effect. So it is the responsibility of the TSOs to identify the crisis scenarios at a national level and identify their cross-border dependencies. So we're looking at national crisis scenarios that form a potential candidate for a regional crisis scenario. So, the responsibilities on the TSOs to do this, but it's not their job alone. They're required to work with close cooperation with the national competent authorities, because the TSOs will be able to identify electricity crisis based on historic crises that have occurred, and their own operational expertise and experience and judgment. But they will not be fully aware of the risks that the national competent authorities want to assess, such as, say, cybercrime or cyber attacks or terrorism, or other factors that the competent authorities may well be aware of, but not party to the TSO. So to complete a full picture, the TSOs must work closely with the competent authorities, and we've worked with the ECG to emphasize that point. So the spirit of the regulation is very much a cooperation between TSOs and the competent authorities throughout. So, and it'll, when it comes to the establishment of the risk preparedness plans, it'll also be a cooperative association. So the first step is then to identify these national crisis scenario candidates, and we need to understand what those cross-border dependencies are within that, and a descriptive picture of that scenario. And then the TSOs will then submit those scenarios to ENTSO-E. So the next slide, please. So the next step then is that for ENTSO-E to then aggregate those national scenarios and to collect them together to get a regional picture. At this stage, they will also look at gap analysis, so that if there is any information missing, that we would need to go back to the TSOs to gather more information, and we'll also inject any scenarios that we feel are missing at a regional level. So there may well be, so there's a picture already supplied from ENTSO-G of regional risk to gas supply. So we'll look at those, injecting those if they have not been identified as national crisis scenarios with a regional impact. We will inject those at this point so that the TSOs can then assess the impact in the next step. So there will be a point where ENTSO-E now look at that, carry out a gap analysis, and inject other scenarios that may not have been considered by the TSOs, or where, for instance, all neighbouring TSOs have identified a crisis, but a TSO has missed that. We will put that back to the TSOs that haven't identified that. So the next step then, please. Next slide. So the step 3 in the process then is, once we've now got a collection of regional crisis scenarios, is to present back to those TSOs to carry out a likelihood and impact rating on those scenarios. We go into the description of how they do that within the methodology. Our preference is for them to use probabilistic risk analysis to carry out the likelihood and impact assessment. But in some cases, it'll, such as cybercrime, it'll have to be a deterministic approach. Obviously, we want some form of consistency for TSOs to assess on a consistent approach to the both likelihood and impact scores. So in terms of likelihood on the slide, and it's a bit of a busy slide, but the likelihood scores are shown, and an example of those descriptions of possible likelihood. And in terms of impact, we're looking at expected energy not supplied, and loss of load expectations. So we're talking about duration and size. So in terms of annual demand or hours. We're looking at a combination piece, so each score of impact is marked separately for each crisis. So each TSO will need to score the likelihood and impact for each scenario on themselves. The next slide, please. So then we use a lookup table using the impact ratings and the likelihood ratings, which will give a overall crisis rating for the TSO. So this is try to have a consistent measure for each TSO and a consistent yardstick to measure each crisis scenario by. And that tabular format is how we expect them to score those crisis scenarios. So the next slide, please. So once we've got a overall impact rating for a likelihood and impact rating for the crisis scenarios, of course, we need to look at a regional picture. So we'll have a national score, but we then need to look at what dependency does that have across border. So we need to score each of those crisis scenarios against a cross-border impact. So each TSO or member states in TSOs in that member state will rank each crisis scenario with a cross-border dependency rating, and the table on the bottom right. So we multiply the cross-border dependency rating from the impact from the crisis scenario rating previously described, and you come up with a national rating. And the regional rating will be a summation of all those member state scores for that crisis. So the regional rating in the right-hand column of the bottom of the bottom table will give a overall regional rating for that crisis. And a consistency check of those scorings and the cross-border dependencies will be carried out by ENTSO-E to make sure that we're looking at a holistic view and each scoring is consistent across the picture for the regional crisis. And the ranking of each scenario will therefore have a regional rating that we can present as the which will give an indication of the relevance of each crisis scenario. And it gives an example for 3 member states in that table and a regional rating score. So next slide, please. I think so that is effectively the methodology for identification of regional crisis scenarios. It's quite a simplistic step-by-step approach, and believe that makes sense and is very clear for the TSOs and ENTSO-E to use that methodology. Okay, so that concludes the presentation on our methodology of regional crisis scenarios, and I'll hand back to Alban to cover the methodology for short-term and seasonal adequacy assessment.
Thank you very much, Bruce. So yes, I will continue. Just before that, I wanted to inform you that the slides will be put on the SharePoint, will be shared, and also the webinar is recorded. So if all runs well, we will also upload it in the website so that you are aware and it's available for you. There was also some question related to publishing the list of attendees. Unfortunately, because of the protection of general data protection regulation, GDPR, it's not possible unless each would agree. So at the comment status, but it's something that can be discussed, but we are striving for high transparency. So regarding methodology for short-term and seasonal adequacy assessment. So first, I want to give you, I would say, the view of the big paradigm change that we are facing. We have been facing for several years, and it will continue. So yes, we were 10 years ago in a very centralized generation and mainly dispatchable generation. Today we are moving to more and more decentralized generation and very often variable generation. We were also in the past relatively to demand. We had a relatively forecastable demand time series with some peaks and off peaks hours. Now we are moving to a very complex also demand behavior with a proactive demand behavior. So this so-called prosumer. For instance, meaning that in your home you can have smart charging of your future electric vehicle or any batteries to allow both to reduce the peak and to charge the batteries during the off-peak times. And the off-peak times are moving also. They are not always necessary at the same period. They're not always necessary in the night. And we have some Sunday midday time that where the electricity is very abundant because of the photovoltaic, for instance. So that is something new that was not 10 years ago. So because of that, we need a robust methodology for adequacy, especially, and we are moving already in that direction, but it will be a big step further with this the current methodology I will describe. We have a high temporal volatility. It means, for instance, the winds can change a lot from one hour to another one. So we cannot have any more deterministic approach, taking just sample hours, but we need a consistent probabilistic approach. And here we are going to hourly calculations with behavior of historical reanalysis of winds correlated to temperature, to photovoltaic and hydro data. This is something very important. The second is also the spatial volatility. So the wind can blow in one place and then later on in another place. It's increasing also with the sun. It's not exactly the same at the same place. And because of that, and because also of the demand, who is also moving, we have a very high increase of exchanges that is already ongoing for at least 10 years, but that will probably further increase to mitigate and to have the synergies between the different moments that are not necessarily synchronous. So because of that, it's very crucial to have the pan-European interconnection consideration. And we have seen, we have it already in our current modeling, so it's not something new in ENTSO-E adequacy. But we noticed that, for instance, one border, I would say one row of border of the next immediate country is not necessary enough because there are some very high flows crossing several countries and having an impact on adequacy. So that's why we consider a large modeling, and if it can be regional, but the largest as possible number of countries for considering these interconnections. So this is for introducing the main the main paradigm change. Well, I said we are already in our current products that I will present addressing the interconnections, also starting to go toward this probabilistic approach. but we need to go one step further with this methodology. So concretely, here I will present you the overview of the different adequacy products at ENTSO-E, but also at regional and national levels. So we have products showing several years ahead, which are called midterm adequacy, which we'll call resource adequacy in the electricity regulation. So it's another methodology that is being drafted also currently in the clean energy package. It's another regulation, but there are some synergies, and there are very important links to seasonal outlook several months ahead, where we will also have a similar probabilistic approach, so that we are implementing now. We will need probably until end of 2020, winter 2020, to have full implementation stepwise, and we are currently testing it already. We have been testing it for 6 months, and we will continue in that direction. So in parallel to that, we are drafting this methodology together with the short-term adequacy, which is month, week to day ahead. And also the short-term adequacy is being tested already today in a weekly update of a week ahead adequacy. And it has been also tested months ahead adequacy, especially during the critical situation we had in 2 of the past winters. So that is for the pan-European ENTSO-E calculation, and then in some cases when needed, there are regional or national sensitivities. So the midterm regional sensitivities would be more to have some optional fast, for instance, change of accelerated coal phase out, or nuclear phase down, or any change in the energy mix to see it as sensitivity, especially when it concerns one country or one region. And then for seasonal outlook, it could be the same, but here you don't have 6 months ahead. You don't have time to change the energy mix. It's more about the countermeasures. And when you enter the week ahead, and even several days ahead, you have the infra-week regional adequacies. This one is also another project that will be led by the regional coordination centers, currently the regional security coordinators. And this will be triggered, especially when there is a risk detected at pan-European level, to go through the details and have a much higher granularity here. For instance, considering the different grids and countermeasures. So the nearer we are from real time, the highest we need to go into accurate details. And when you are more long or midterm, you need rather robustness than necessary accuracy. So I propose we go on to the next slide. So the principles for adequacy, they are the same actually for the different products that I mentioned in the slide before. Especially also for the midterm adequacy, it's the same principles. So what we do is that we have databases for each subset of the energy mix. So for the generation, so with the different capacities, installed capacity or available capacity, the different maintenance, and then we have for the wind solar generation, we have a set of reanalysis data with hourly values that are correlated between the wind, solar, and also hydro and temperature, that are correlated in time, so from 1 hour to another, but also in space from one country to another one, which is important. We consider also the force outages of the generators. And the hydro energy availability is a hydro modeling, which is in high complexity. You have the hydro rivers, the runoff rivers, but also the storage and the pumping when relevant. So this is huge in using dedicated tools that allows an optimization of this storage. Relative to the network infrastructure, we consider the availability of the network, especially the planned outage, means the maintenance that we can have. When we are seasonal ahead or week ahead or month ahead, we have already an existing planning of maintenance outage for the infrastructure or for the generators, and that is considered. In the midterm, when we go, it's another regulation, but in the midterm, we have it also considered, but more in a stochastic approach than a best estimate. Here, it's a best estimate, meaning that week number 41, there is expectation that this unit will be out, so it's taken out effectively. Then you have the force outage of this units as well. That is these interconnectors as well, especially the HVDC that is considered. And then relatively to the demand, we consider the demand profile with a tool considering the dependency on to temperature, to weather condition, to nebulosity, and so on, but also considering the evolutions of the demand growth on the heat pump and possible evolution of demand by country. So each of these data are gathered in dedicated databases, and we have a granularity at country level at least, or even bidding zone level within a country when relevant, like currently Italy, Sweden, and Norway. And for demand, we have also the demand side response that is considered as a best estimator. Today, we still have moderate values for that, especially in the short term. It is something that might change in the coming 5 years. And as I mentioned already, the weather conditions are considered in a whole, so in a correlated way for cold wave, but also the wind correlated to the cold wave or the sun and so on, so that you have situation that corresponds to possible realistic situations and not purely arbitrary mathematical. So I propose to go to the next slide. So concretely, for the seasonal to for the short-term and seasonal adequacy assessment, we have produced a methodology which is draft currently available on the consultation. This consists in 2 documents. One is the document giving the principle and the legal general approaches that should mention especially the key points like the probabilistic approach, the interconnections and the different modelings and the cold wave, the extreme weather conditions, and how to use that together. And then the explanatory notes is more examples and possible description or possible graphs to help the reader to see what we could do. What is challenging in this kind of evolution is that we draft something that we will need to implement and to apply after a couple of months, and it should be realistic, it should be feasible. So that's why we also want to highlight that it will be a continuous improvement, and if needed, this methodology will be revised by Acer as is written in the clean energy package after a certain number of years when we create it. So that is the principle is really to start from this common approach. And also what is important, I didn't mention explicitly, is that this methodology principles would be used by the national and regional studies as well for consistency. Next slide, please. So relatively to the structure of the document, without going into the details, it's a kind of document like a network code type of document with the whereas and subject what it is about. And then there is a part on the definitions, which also consider all definitions that are available in regulations. Then we have a part about the general adequacy assessment approach, which is common for seasonal and short-term to intraday. And then we have two specific chapters about the specificities of seasonal and the specificity of short-term adequacy assessment. So I will give you an example of these specificities. In seasonal ahead today, we have for the weather forecast we use the probability of any historical or reanalyzed database with our meteorologist experts. So it means we don't know if it will be very cold or very warm or at 6 months ahead yet. So we use a large sample. Whereas in the week ahead, we use the best estimate of the real weather forecast 1 week ahead, which is available with the temperature with some uncertainty that is high or low. Also, we use that for the wind forecast as well. So this is one big difference, and the short term is obviously will have more parameters that are fixed because we are more real time. So then we have a chapter about the adequacy assessment process. So how it works process-wise, and one last about the publication, the implementation. So to give you an example of these explanatory notes beside the document, we were investigating different visualization possibilities. Today we have a standardized tool, and we are going towards this kind of visualization to show the spatial overview of all Europe. Which country are more? This is a fictive example. Which country could have more risk during the next seasonal assessment, for instance, here on the left. And then we would like to propose a temporal screening, so going weekly base under the season to see exactly which week is more critical and for which regions. And then when we go on the right side for the short-term adequacy assessment, so here is an example of week ahead. You have the hourly availability, expected availability of sufficient resource to cover the demand. And then when it's green here, it means that no risk is identified. And then when it's either orange or red, there are some risk identified, and then there are deeper analysis. And the graph on the bottom on the right, it's an example of hourly schedule at week ahead. Where you can see here, it's very small, but it's an example. You can see here the different probabilistic view of the demand, the solar, photovoltaic, the solar, the wind, and the different generations. Okay, thank you very much. So I am out with slides about adequacy, about seasonal and short-term adequacy. So I propose we have a break of around 5 minutes just for us to review your comments, because we didn't have time to review all in parallel, so that in 5 minutes we come back for going through your comments, and you can still continue to write comments. Thank you very much.
Hello.
So I think we can start with answering your question. Thank you very much for the questions. And if we cannot answer to all of them, we will answer written by email. And we will see as possibly publish. We can publish the question in our website as well. So Bruce, maybe do you want to start with answering the questions?
Yeah, so the just going through the questions, I've had technical difficulty trying to read the questions. But the first question from Eric about missing several risks. So there's a within the methodology, I only mentioned a few of the high lighted risks that were required, actually named in the regulation that need to be included. Within the methodology, there is a whole list of risks to be considered. Within the question, actually, there's a number of things that are risks, but also effects of a crisis, and it'll be for the TSO to determine what those effects are from each crisis. But we have a non-exhaustive list of for TSOs to consider. So. Although there are some missing clearly from what I described in the presentation, there is actually a full non-exhaustive list to consider for the TSOs, and it's for the TSOs to consider the effects of those. Okay, so then hopefully that answers that question. The next question from Davor about competent authority. Who is the competent authority? Well, the member states need to nominate those competent authorities by 2020, 5th of January 2020. At the moment, it's whoever represent them in terms of energy security of supply at that level at the moment. So it's a representation of the member state. So the next question for me, I would have expected that as in a TYNDP, the process would have taken all Europe together, even with a common grid model. Well, effectively it does, but the starting point is a bottom-up approach process, because the TSOs are the only ones that are technically capable of assessing the risks on a national level. ENTSO-E and the RSCs are made up a coordinating role and made up of representations from the TSOs. So it's the TSOs actually that require to provide the expertise and knowledge on the impact and risks and the crisis scenarios that affect them. So in terms of all Europe together, yeah, all Europe is considered, and so at the moment, in terms of the process of the methodology, we're not preemptive of any region. We're looking at the effect of a crisis scenario across all the member states, or the TSO areas. So yeah, it's not bounded by anything at the moment. The crisis area forms its own boundary, and then we'll see which regions that applies to. You missed the point of Article 8. Regional crises may well be born from regional interdependencies. Before TSOs consider it okay to be dependent or on import of services, it may not be a national crisis, but a regional crisis. Yeah, indeed. And so the first step for is for that to be considered. So we have that bottom-up approach, and for those considerations to take into account when they're talking about cross-border dependencies. but that is also the point of the step 2, is the gap analysis and the consistency check, which will be carried out by the ENTSO-E working group and the RSCs. So the next question, hopefully that question, I think the next one for me is from Stefan. Is there already an at least rough timeline existing when TSOs will ask to deliver national scenarios, when ENTSO-E present national scenarios and so on? So yeah, absolutely, and that is described in the methodology now. So we've once we provided the methodology, ASA then have 2 months to approve the methodology, and then ENTSO-E then have 6 months to apply the methodology to deliver the crisis scenario. So quite correctly, we've got to break down each step in the process to fit in with that timeline. So the first step, I think we prescribed 6 weeks. So within 6 weeks, the TSOs, along with a competent authority, will need to have delivered the national crisis scenarios to ENTSO-E. So that's likely to run on the current timeline of following 2 months of ASA approval. The delivery of Article 6 of the methodology, the crisis scenarios, will start from March the 4th, 2020, and will be required to be delivered by September the 4th, 2020. So yeah, so I think for each step we've given a time period for delivery. The first step is 6 weeks, second step is 4 weeks, I think, and then the impact assessment and likelihood assessment is a further 6 weeks. Hopefully, I think that completes my questions. I think hopefully they're answered satisfactorily.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. I will continue with the questions relative to adequacy. And in case we miss some question, yes, we'll come back later on to you, because I see there are quite several as well. So there are 2 questions relative to the climate database. One from Laurent Dubus and one from Davor Bosniak. So the first being related to the consultation possibility to improve the climate information to ensure relevance and continuity between short-term and seasonal scales. Yes, the consultation is there for any proposals. I didn't mention it. ENTSO-E is working together with the Copernicus project, climate change project, which involve different entities, and they are especially investigating this seasonal forecast. What could be an improvement is in the future is to have a forecast, let's say a trend forecast of the next winter or summer, if it's rather dry or rather not dry, or rather cold or rather not cold. So that could be helpful for the adequacy indeed. I understood it's something that is ongoing, and there are different projects on that. And the related questions from Davor is about collaboration with ECMWF, which is the European Center for Medium Weather Forecast, if I'm not wrong. So it's one entity working also with this Copernicus project. So at ENTSO-E, currently we do not have possibility, also resource, to have many bilateral projects or discussions, but we try to concentrate and to focus on the Copernicus project, which will support the modeling of the climate data, but including the climate change effect, which is something that we don't have yet. Then one comment from Andris Svalovs about I mentioned we are going more decentralized. However, the modeling becomes more integrated. So how it fits together? Actually, it is true that the decentralized generation on demand is growing. But in the meanwhile, there is also a very high need of coordination at European level. That's why we need this coordinated approach, and the goal of this risk preparedness also for the two methodologies is to have a high coordination between the member states. So I will go to the next question. So another question from Davor about the involvement of stakeholders, obligatory or voluntary, with national TSOs and ENTSO-E for such short-term and seasonal adequacy assessments. So depends on what you mean with stakeholders. So the ACER is one key body for this methodology. Will approve the methodology after this is sent by ENTSO-E. And ACER can also ask request ENTSO-E to update the methodology when needed. So there is for each step a very large consultation where various stakeholders are involved, like this webinar, like the consultation we have ongoing. So relative to that, there will be a strong collaboration needed with different stakeholders. Then there is a question about Katharina Bauer about the link between midterm resource adequacy and TYNDP scenarios. So I mentioned the midterm, so several years ahead in the introduction. It's not the scope of the current methodology. It's another one which is being drafted, and there will be also a public consultation on this one. The link to the TYNDP, the 10-year development plan scenarios, yes, it will be ensured. Especially the midterm adequacy will use the same database and the same principles and methodologies like available in the scenario building of TYNDP. But this is something that is being on drafting phase, not yet for consultation, but expected later this autumn, the consultation. Okay, then for the next question, so yes, interbalancy between RPM on the methodology of article, yes, exactly, article 23. It's what I mentioned here. So there are the methodology for midterm adequacy, which is another regulation, the electricity regulation, article 23. So that's something different and correlated, yes, and the methodology will be also consistent. Okay, then there was one or two left. Yes, this one from Michaelis Papachrislousis. Sorry if I spread your name. So the short-term adequacy methodology describes the process that will be followed by ENTSO-E to carry out summer and winter outlook, and by the RCC to carry out the week day-ahead adequacy. How does the methodology apply to individual TSO carrying out independently their own adequacy assessment within their national boundaries? So as far as I understood, there is a consistent approach that is requested by the clean energy package, so that the methodologies used by regional and national use the same principal approaches. They can have more granularities, they can have different sensitivities and different stress tests, but the approach should be the same according to my understanding from the clean energy package. But they can have also some additional approaches. But then, if it's not, it should be feasible to compare both. Okay, and then I see there are quite some questions coming just right now. So yes, it's 11:10. I don't know if Bruce, you have in the meanwhile time to go through them, so some of them.
Yeah, I'm not sure if any of the other questions are related to Article 5, Alban.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. I see there are very technical questions. So what we propose is, yes, we need to investigate, and we will reply to that, and I will try to make an overview of the question and answer that all of you should be able to look at that. So thank you very much for your attendance. And yes, just before going and leaving, I would give you the takeaway of today. So that the risk preparedness different methodologies is strengthening this European cooperation, which is key, especially through these common methodologies. You are invited to give your views on the two methodologies that we presented today. And the public consultation is ongoing until 8th of October, and you have the link here, which is basically on our ENTSO-E website when you click on consultation. Thank you very much for your attendance or for your questions. We will reply, as we said, by probably even publishing the documents, the answers on the site, which will be more efficient. And publishing also the slides on the website as well. We will publish the recorded webinar. Have a nice day. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.